Hello to the World Wide Web. Everybody that's tuning in, I want to welcome you to another Backroom Broadsides poetry reading. Tonight, I'm really looking forward to the lineup we have. I'm very proud of it as well. We've got John D'Souza and Valerie Oyster. And, you know, poetry can do many different sorts of things. But tonight's poetry is about looking at things differently. And it uses that old, I'm not going to call it a trick of poetry, to present things in a new light, a fresh slice of reality, a surreal. And I believe it was Apollinaire who coined the term surreal, meaning super real. And I believe we have two super real experiences in poetry tonight. So let me introduce the first reader, who will be Valerie Oyster. I go back to Valerie's poetry a long time ago. In 1975 or 76, my father was working overtime, so I said to my mother, who loved Manhattan, let's go to New York. I want to go to the Avant-Garde Poetry Festival at the very new World Trade Center. And I was working for the Poetry Project at the time. And so she agreed, and then I agreed I would take her out for lunch afterwards in New York. So as we're mingling around that big plaza between the two towers, a man came up to us in a space helmet, and now I learned also in a Speedo, but a naked man in a space helmet handing me this wonderful little book of poetry that he had brought. And it was Valerie Oyster. And it's a favorite story of mine because my mother, who was dressed in her complete Donna Reed, normal, traditional, suburban housewife finery, she wasn't only wearing pants, she was wearing, as they would say at Sears, slacks. So there we were, and she behaved wonderfully. She didn't freak out, it was great. Anyway, I told that story at her funeral, and people loved that story. And my family is very straight. They're wonderful people, but they're very straight. Anyway, Valerie came to the United States. He was born in the middle 1943 of World War II in the Soviet Union, a Romanian born in the Soviet Union in the middle of World War II. He came to the United States in 1974, and he's ours now. And when I read his latest book, in the blink of a third eye, I feel there's a real Americanness to this brand of surrealist poetry. And maybe I'm the only one, but I seem to like surrealist poetry that has connections to Eastern Europe. There's a kind of grittiness to it. And my favorite aspect of American poetry is its kind of grittiness. It's Walt Whitman-y grittiness. And this is surrealism with a grittiness. It's descriptive surrealism. Doesn't often happen. Surrealists often just kind of go into their, not this guy. Anyway, I really recommend the book. There's about a half a dozen sections in it. It begins, I was a former travel writer for like 30 years. It begins with a wonderful set of poems describing Morocco, his travels in Morocco. And I wish I had read that when I was writing travel, because the detailing is just a little off, and it makes it, by saying off, I mean off straight. Anyway, please allow me to give you this wonderful poet that New York's been blessed with all these years. I mean, I said blessed, lucky to have all these years. Valerie Oyster. Valerie.
Thank you, James. Beautiful. And I will start my reading with a humorous poem of an invented new holiday that I created, and it's called the International Day of Tickling, February 29, 2020. Looking at the sun that bites with frozen teeth, I am throwing out my old French dictionary where tickle is translated chatouer. Yes, it is International Tickling Day, but no one even knows about it. No one has arrived with a tickle delivery. I'll probably have to go out in the street and ask some passerby to tickle me. Tickle me, please. Do not worry, I am no ordinary pervert. I'm a humble observer of Tickling Day. I even have blue surgical gloves with me to be sure that you aren't touching my skin. Have you ever tickled a surrealist poet? Okay, no one. I'm calling neighbors and friends. Come down and tickle me just a little. Finally, decided to bribe a homeless man. But even he refuses me straight away. I'm getting bored, paranoid, and a bit angry. Is this like a new phobia that I didn't know about? What is the matter with these people? Indifferent breeds more indifference. Soon, I will give up and go back to my lab. Going to invent a potion for mass tickling. Authorized, guarantee, self-induced. Long live the International Day of Tickling. My second poem is from Morocco. And I travel, and it was written during this trip to the ancient cities of Morocco, Fez, Marrakesh, etc. And it's called Women of Morocco. Invisible burqas with eyes, eyebrows like a bird's dark wings, scarf-cladded Berber women, busy with children. At Riyadh's smile of French-educated women managers and a team of female servants appropriated outfits. At Café Tivoli in Fez, a singer with insect-like eyelashes. You want a camel burger and a Coke? Simpatico waitresses laugh in downtown Medina. So many jewelry stores laden with antiques, artisanal ethnic stores run by women, rugs, pottery, street figures in hijab seated on donkeys, mouths twisted by suppressed endless despair. Country girls with big feet grind argan nuts into oil. Full burqa mamas in bazaars sell useless souvenirs, running away from photo-obsessed tourists. Men in cafes watch the alley's female shadows. Morning drive by the river, girls wash their scarves, harvesting olives in a wizard fields, cooking, they're taking shapes of tagine pot, sad songs of dead daughters, sisters, lovers, brides at 13 in photos sitting beside an old man. Where are those who pray out of sight? The lightning rods of the 2011 Arab Revolution. Mysteriously elusive women of Morocco. The third poem is about the earthquake flowers of Fukushima. The poem was inspired by a tsunami that devastated that part of Japan, and unusual flowers after the nuclear disaster. So these are the flowers of Fukushima. They whisper from behind the stones. Their roots embrace the peaks and cracks, waiting for the raindrops to hurt them. But the earthquake flora does not die. Helplessly groaning and moaning, covered with blanket of dust, only lightning uncovers colors. The bleeding petals push the soil, embracing the radioactive landscape. In hidden crevices, elusive perfumes bloom. A deeper wound in a meltdown cave. The days, hours, and minutes unknown to the clock, to the calendar, to the memory. By the time the sun scuns the top of the trees, the rain of deadly flowers strikes. The twister that lifts the broken roofs, spin purple moon and elongated clouds, stringing together the unidentifiable birds. Leathery lizards swarm the shrines. Nuclear gutter birds in green heaven spin like a Ouija board out of control, and lead petals cover a bleak landscape. Wildflowers burst and bubble into the sky.
Man, you go, Valerie.
The next poem, it's called Scorched Landscape of My Third Eye. It's an abstract surrealist poem mentioning André Breton and Duchamp. My head echoes the sounds of vertical eyes falling through the cracks in my windows. What you are about to hear, to endure, is ice crushing ice, hallucinatory avalanche. Nadja killed by André Breton, Amour fou, a captive whale silently smiling. Duchamp fetishisting mistakes lay bare. A lunatic messenger from a mutant void. Ichito harpsichordis in need of a tune-up. Zebra ostrich hunted by four-clawed birds. Horizontal vaginas seeking square pricks. An upright piano housing giant locust bees. The purity of intention pushing a dark abyss. A zeppelin flying against the solid darkness. Rhythmic waterfalls, streaming blue jellyfish, chess horses chasing chestnut transparency, captive of my scorched, undiscovered landscapes. White fire escapes, rising toward invisibility, a turning point encircled by magic lamps. Smoke blackened tunnels surround shrunken heads, a convenient darkness pointing in all directions as the knives pierce immeasurable fear laughter, inconsequential, exhausted, immortal unreality, threatened by my apocalyptic vision lethargy. The next poem, it's called Dada Not on Tour. This poem describes non-commercial values of Dada and mentions some of predecessor of Dadaism, as well as its main character of Romanian origin, Tristan Tzara. Supra-Dadaists flagellate the milk ghost of impostors. 100 years along in a bird cemetery, inside a fluid skeptic clock, deep in a dark fish tank, outside of the dolphins' underwater cave temples, with Tsar, Tristan, Dada, daddy of simultaneity, broken Dada without borders, Japono Dada, occulti Dada, portal into the planetary sagacity. De Quincey was Dada. Alfred Jarry, the prophet, was Dada. Tristan Zarathustra shouts disgust, imagination, on the other side of the train of thought tracks. Swiss bourgeois derogatory put down, Dadaisten. Not a great night at Cabaret Voltaire. Too many Dadas. Dada, a mind exercise of free association, revolution encompassing sex, drugs, and art. Dada is nada, just a backward time traveler, a chance illusionistic misled on purpose. Tempest, temple, templar. Dada is not a cult, is the noise. Anti-life lifestyle, battled throughout human silence, self-destructive, déjà jadi, lost in a past, spiritual Dada fiber optics, synaptic synapses, defending the devastation of the deep seas. The uber conscience could not be televised. Transgender mannequins in ceramic bicycles, invisible acrobats flying over the liquid, limpid wind. Neo-Dada not sponsored by Mensa. Dada not on tour. Dada eludes cultural poachers. Were you in an art coma during the last century? Resistant to hierarchies, radical subconsciousness. You probably woke up as a post-surrealist, analog artist in a digital Dada world. Smash bipolar dementia of the art market, of tyranny, of unachievable lugubrious prices. Occupy centenary of uncompromising art. Occupy the impossible, misunderstanding dreams. A mix of trance and brain miasmas. Approximative woman's tranquilidad. Mysterious emotion after discovering my muse.
Beautiful.
So now I am going to read Loneliness of a Lost Horseshoe. It's a personal, sort of autobiographical lamentation of all the accidents that I went through. Pain was violently kidnapped from my body. A sample of poet's blood dragged to a lab. I did not dream a broken bone, a hole in my left foot, but my limbs suffer for accidental falls. Biographers would be seduced by my pain blues. I have shattered all my toes, some of them twice. Crooked right hand, left arm weak, smashed my head. I am a living image of a self-mutilating poet. Of course, some are chance operational, objective karma, an unintentional collection of remodeled bones. Bones do not heal easily, the way they did before. Phantom pains and strange bumps and holes. The caves of my skin, on the muscle, on the flesh, there is someone that rules the yin and the yang. Ludicrously impartial, unexpected hurting glow. Life is a lucha libre competition for the injured. They say you never fight solo in a shower or on a crosstown bus full of gentrified jerks. No excruciating pain, no ecstasy trance pain, no gain. Nevertheless, the poetic music of suffering must go on. No two umbrellas. It stopped raining in the middle of the train. Me, an unemployed luchador with broken wings. Madonna de Guadalupe, the Black Virgin, sheds white tears, laughing in spite of all, weeping with sarcastic tenderness. Pray for the dark caves crashing inside my liver. The Dada cyborgets feel pain in metachanical side. The well-timed, self-destructive body with an immortal soul. Watch pleasure and pain die in a ballads of loneliness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I'm going to read another humorous poem. It's called Who Stole My Shoes? It's a poem written on my trip to Japan in 2019, where the footwear has different meanings and symbols. Woke up in the morning, got the missing shoes blues. Someone vamoose with my shoes. From Takayama to Kanazawa, too much obsession with footwear. No shoes in the house, no shoes in the temple, no shoes in the library. Sneakers are for subways, Doro for straw mats. My slippers got a yen for my zen. One shoe is just old, the other one blue, quite new. Varigi, Miori Jetta, Massagetta. The throngs of toes of strangers line up in front of a gate, stuck in boxes, in plastic bags, slip into uncomfortable slippers. Off with your daily dirt. But who stole my shoes? Shuffling along up to the door of the chocolate foot massage. This shoe is being used as a coffin. Stay in your shoe. Stay in your queue. In Zori straw slippers, they're waiting for you. Tengu Jetta, devil's footwear. Okobi Jetta for geishas. Where are the warajis, my magic slippers? They're gone. Barefoot in the morning. Barefoot in the morning. Barefoot in the morning. Then next poem is dedicated to Guillaume Apollinaire,
Yeah.
that the French poet who is credited with inventing the word surrealism. And he got wounded during World War I and died shortly after that. Unscrew the skull and paint the brain of the organ consistently inconsistent as a consequence of neurotic inaction, malpracticed brainiacs destroying the labyrinth of whispering dreams, caves full of inhabited poems, never to be written, even as obscure film scripts. The mind continues to drum with anguish poetry, beating, weeping, breathing in unheard jazz, full of debris of ignored existence, folds and rolls of surreal notation, webs leaking quotation from Apollinaire, memorial haiku hidden in frontal lobes, neural connection disconnected, raw, the optic nerve busying itself with recipes as acoustic watches tick away the seconds, while snail-shaped molecules scream poetry. Our endangered species creeps along apocalyptically, cutting off the edge of endless time.
Oh.
And I'm going to end this reading with a poem that is about the process of writing poetry. And it's this poem went through me. It's a poem about how I was writing in Washington Square Park and looking at the building where a famous photographer, André Kertész, who invented distortions in mirrors, he lived there and worked there and photographed the Washington Square Park from above, from the roof of that building. Garibaldi is walking small dogs in Washington Square Park. Clouds searching, birds watching. I can hear myself thinking aloud. Magnolias are blooming wildly, bleeding colors on a passing tourist. Coffee in hand, earbuds, hoodies. The cityscape breaks above like metal weeds. On the edge of an afternoon, tuba shouting from a jazz band near the fountain. Giant soap bubbles floating through the tarot readers, wearing a gray dunce wizard hat, eyes closed. The black and white ghost of André Kertész jumps from the roof of a building overlooking the park from Fifth Avenue, shooting pictures while falling through time. The shape of an angry spring wind blows away all my contradictions. The loneliness of a poet in a crowded park, writing a poem, escaping from his soul. Thank you very much.
Bravo.
This
Bravo.
was my time.
Really beautiful. I was I was with Andre Cottage flying above Washington Square Park. How beautiful that was, man. Thank you so much. I want to hold up for our friends in the audience the book that you can get in the blink of a third eye. You can buy believe me, some of these poems that he just read are in here. Most of them, like the one with Andre Cortege, is in there. And by the way, check out Andre Cortege. But if you want to know how to go about doing this, you can go to a website, and I'm going to read it for you very carefully. It's
Spoitenduivel.
That's right. I got it here.
Yeah, that's my publisher.
Oh, here it is. Yeah, I wrote it down here. Yeah, www.spoitenduivel. Now I'm going to spell that. .net. I'm going to spell it. SPUYTENDUIVIL.net. You will not regret this book. I guarantee it. It's a beauty.
Thank you, James.
Valerie, it was so beautiful. You read a lot of the poems that leapt out for me from this book, especially that Washington Square thing. I was reading that last night over and over. It was beautiful. The last 4 lines really killed me. Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you, James. God bless.
Same to you, man. The next poet we're going to have tonight is John D'Souza. What can I say about John D'Souza? I met John, I think about 3 or 4 years ago now. I've been living here in Jersey City, I guess, for about 25 years. And a few years ago, the place got pretty interesting in terms of having a conversation with somebody. John, a terrific poet, and I'll get into that in a second, had moved in, and all of a sudden there was somebody to have breakfast with and to talk about things that nobody else gave a shit about. Anyway, what can I say about John's poetry? I was thinking about how I would introduce it tonight, and I kept thinking about his poetry, and I kept coming up with the image of strands of DNA. And the reason I say that, in John's work, I find that he uses strings of logic almost like they're objects. And what I find so interesting about that is these different strings of logic kind of pivot off each other. And I find myself, it's sort of like watching a great halfback cut through a football field, spinning this way and that way. John's pivoting semantically through his poetry. And when you watch the pivots, it's really quite a dance. Anyway, please allow me to introduce the poet, John D'Souza. And by the way, he's born in Montreal, so we've got a real international thing going tonight.
Yes, we do.
John.
Thank you so much, James. Another wonderful introduction. You're going to be writing the intros to all my books from now on, because it couldn't be better. I also want to thank Jocelyn and the RNA for making this all possible, and everyone who's in attendance and those who may have time to watch this later. There'll be a recording up on the RNA site on YouTube. Thank you, James. All right. The first poem I'm going to read is a poem called Pilgrim. So many lived unsuspecting. These bitchy, forthright days continue, bold, almost cavalier in their sordid intent, frosted with moldy neglect. We know you, harumphing about your mourning. What gives? Give us some peace already, cowboy. Or just for a moment, favor the rosy sky, like a cake wrapper, the grayest-eyed woman, or a slender god in golden raiment, chocolate breath like the promise of favorable resolutions. As you tell yourself something to believe in, they want us like that, in line, but not so free as this here, discerning as the pecking sparrow, or unrelenting as the snow-white moth, pushing out of its pupa. Childhood images of a bunch of old dwarves and a young maiden can seem Well, not so fairy tale as perhaps Pornhub portrays. Another formulation of cash-hungry weakness, but funny if done right. Now that's better. Not the old austerity of black and white with the usual rock and tall black hats and bitterest cold, which brings fires to burn us, speaking in such tongues. Baffled analysts are modeling a way in for operatives with their traps and polonium. What a sorry bunch, concocting examples, dominating the conference call with grunts and expletives, snickering. And these others who return home, weary on grim winter evenings, greeted happily. The moth struggled all morning. Too bitter, the sparrow relented. Such light remains. That is Pilgrim. I can see James clapping at least. I really miss seeing everyone at the Fox and Crow and having my pint of Guinness and, commenting on the sidelines. Those were the days. Hopefully they'll be back again soon. All right, in the spirit of surrealism, I use surrealist elements in my poetry, and very often I use dream. And this is a quick little poem called Mr. Shadow, and it's kind of about revisiting an imagined childhood fear. So this one being Mr. Shadow, a figure that comes at night when you're dreaming. Mr. Shadow. Mr. Shadow waits in the gleaming dark, raspy voiced, grips yours in a vice like bristled ice in the winy freezer. You are cloistered by terror as old as your child brain can remember, even farther, some ancient error relayed in comforting stories of love and martyrs. A palpable mystery, long since retreated to dreams, passing through the descending front like meat in a grinder. Your bones at fingertips raised against touch. Mr. Shadow is patient. He plays his waiting game with a low snicker, voiced from a boat under a moonless night on slow water. How master him, having traveled each tangent fear branching back along splayed tributaries. It's not the sprawling sea you seek, but the grottoed origin, a mossy cleft of icy water raised by rocky centuries. He shapeshifts intentions, probes for weakness, as you stagger the words, what do you want? Awake, twisted in the hot sheet. Mr. Shadow. All right, here's one. Again, I guess I'm, this immigrant thing, I'm from somewhere else and have taken up residence in my life here. So I'm a bit like the Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court, except I'm a bit like of an investigator of the insubstantiality of many utopias. So with that introduction, this is a prose poem. We started off talking about reading some prose poems for this reading, and a couple remained on the list. This one's called Short Memory, and the first little piece of it kind of refers to, imagine an old Buddhist sutra. And I think I was thinking of people like Richard Baker and the Zen monastery at Tassajara and some of the early kind of fascination of America and American poets and practitioners with Zen, and some of the ways that that's good and some of the ways that it isn't, perhaps. Okay, Short Memory. A river, the banks of which are removed. In the sacred sutra, the magnificent morning was also a stale swamp, and blossoms burst from the mucky muck in furious fuchsia. These were the same flowers. The chief muckety-muck chanted, I am one among you, I am one among you, over and over. His learned sidekick wrote down all the spells of transformation, then snuck in a few of his own. The adepts flocked like penguins to see. The control freaks felt appeased for a time. Everything was set now for the big after party. Why wait? This was living. They had cornered the market way up in the winding hills, overlooking the sweaty valley that was crammed with the usual life. There was everything down there, with the same vultures. And the women, man, did they look like women. Though the men were mostly dicks for even thinking this. Many transgressed the old laws, having grown fatigued with all that seriousness, and made up new laws that might be cinched so much tighter. Their new gods had promised to heal the broken staircase of their imperfect DNA. They took potions with names like Sky Flower or Earth Henge and grew bored with too much inwardness, preferring something with sparkles. The new book of spells moved like life. Folks grappled and got thrown off space-age follies. This was a much closer version, and with such stunning cinematographic effect, even more than could be squeezed out of all that cross-leggedness. Now they could sell boku crap like Wars for Profit under the guise of the new imagery that could be installed anywhere on whatever necessary whim. This had to do with a supreme kind of vengeful god, not unlike the old ones, but drunk, maybe, with too much enlightenment. There had been others, of course, with their own very human predilections for guised cruelty. We find ourselves in them and feel revealed, as was intended. The old sickness returns, the intimation of nothingness at the heart of a carefully, even academically constructed meaning. But when the patient stretches out and lets fly, it's not the words that matter, as much as a kind of music, a clear music that was not so hard to get at in the end. They just made it hard, the tech meme groupies, because when alone, all they secretly yearned for was unrehearsed conversation, or maybe just the so-called primitive song that pulsed with the sparkle of a new insight to be wrenched from out the silty darkness.
Bravo.
Short memory. Okay, now I'm going to read two after that, these are just little quick poems. This one has I could go on and on with the introduction, but I won't. It involves the rattlesnake as the symbol for the colonies, and the rattlesnake flag that probably everybody knows is join or die, the old revolutionary inscription that I don't know how the Tea Party took that one over. But what I hadn't realized was that this was an invention of Benjamin Franklin. And he wrote a kind of satirical piece in which he posited for all of the convicts that England was delivering to the colonies that he would send rattlesnakes back to England in return. And in quote, he would have them, he wrote a little satirical tract, and he said that they should be carefully distributed about London, but particularly in the gardens of the prime ministers, the lords of trade, and members of parliament, for to them we are most particularly obliged. And he closed his article by writing, "Rattlesnakes seem the most suitable returns for the human serpents sent us by our mother country." All right. So this is called, James is laughing. So this is called Snakes and Bailiwicks, a 3-stanza poem. The injury ran deeper than expected. It wasn't simply a clean break, the way a cut-up snake writhes underfoot, Tea Party aside. Brainy Ben brightens the dreary long night. Enough bailiwicks for this would-be country. Of parents, one with a stick, one with a glove. The slight of the sly jibe, proclaiming repayment enough, writhing in the gardens of Parliament, in exchange for an indelible stain in chains. We fine citizens with flintlocks, not Mayflower maidens, but descendants of prison ships, the blood taste, breath's fog, freedom's hard won. Real rattlers everywhere, and a skinny fox, red in the middle of winter, or her hair in her pale cleft, a bonny lass, freckled thighs finally free of red coats. Each one known and unknown, of the long lines, fathers, mothers, of independence. Snakes and
Bravo.
bailiwicks.
Bravo.
Thank you. The next poem, I guess it's humorous, but it's also pretty serious. It's written like an address to the president, but it's not a specific president. I mean, we all think of the president right now, but it does refer to several different presidents. And it's set during this time that we're in of struggle and protest and injustice and the continuing search for justice. So, Mr. President, your footless landmined list, bunny hop in the midst of another bloody grin, toothless, unanswering. That broken victory lap included untold drone strikes, bedlam abroad, screaming dystopian tales, TV slave escapes, a blackened whiteness. Meaning, this president's Arkansas drawl with a taste for young pussy, or a puritanical African black assembly, machined dream. Now, a huge white stumble while jogging a pandemic night jaunt. So many fathers masked with graffiti spray. Boxed Nikes, a winged victory, smirk, not swish, leapt over sticks and broken bones, necks, a hot night, eye fire, and spittle.
Beautiful.
Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Mr. President. This one I loved Valerie's reading, and I noted that there was a poem involving North Africa getting close to another Mediterranean country we've all been aware of recently in the news, and Fukushima disaster. So those two things are present. Another prose poem called Tears for Beirut. And we all remember that awful explosion in the harbor there. In it, there's some Arabic, so you'll have to excuse my appropriated, probably horrendously terrible accent. I don't speak Arabic, but I wanted to put it in the original. It's from a poem called Lebanon by Khalil Howie. And the reason that it's in the poem is the figure in the poem, this mustache clock, is kind of a cultured, educated man of French culture, of Arab culture, and he's affected by the explosion. And then later in the poem, there's a reference to someone who is his daughter, he's estranged from, who's living in Paris. So, okay, let's go back to that awful day. Tears for Beirut. 6:08 p.m. Sunlight shattered in shards. The clock entered early evening, dressed as a big bushy mustache. It recited, Kunaj idaran yel taki jidaru. We were walls facing walls. Ji mohajal hewara. It was painful to talk. Time for him to leave the colossal ruins of this Cyclops town in the French tradition. Someone had stuffed a kind of obelisk upside down, as if the world now streamed upwards. The oblivious sun edged a cloud with white gold. Footsteps in the hall creaked like a Zeppelin gangplank as he, hairily padded out onto Le Balcon, where he stood straight as the cedars over Kadisha Valley, his face the scarlet face of the flag. Everything had the sweetness of memory, honey and pistachio, of his mother's young hands, orange blossom and rose water. What was the nose up to anyway? Beirut was collapsing, like the Hindenburg, in tatters, but without a commentator, only thousands of gasps. Below in the courtyard lay a large white patty, like a round of melting brie, flattened surreally to the ground. What was she doing so far away, a verbatim voyage away? The mustache clock was a flat tour d'effect, flat meaning not well. Everyone would have their explanations with footnotes and ancient references rolled out, calligraphies, glyphs even, pictograms and runes, bold claims, the spotlight. The shoulders had got on their best ilisab that evening, were draped like a Lebanese phoenix in sculpted silk duchesse with jeweled tones of chartreuse. They admired themselves, glad to be poised under the luminous sky of a fashionable city where they could wear heels far from home and no one would care. How they hated their father, the mustache clock, with all his colonial posturing and bushy demands. A sound came over the screen that tore through time, leaving only the mustache. A white poof, like an enormous moth's cocoon, ballooned upwards, suspended everything, consumed everything, the shape of a precursor to the end. But now was only a voice wailing in a cool green room at dawn. Tears for Beirut.
Mm.
All right, I'm going to read. This one's a funny one. I'd read it through, but the very last line's in French. So I'm going to translate that first because it's kind of important. It's based on the fable of La Fontaine. You probably know those fables. All involve insects of various kinds. And this one is no different. It involves a bee, a lazy bee. But at the end of the poem, he can be heard to exclaim, "À l'œuvre on connaît l'artisan," which means, "À l'œuvre, it is in the work, on connaît, one knows, l'artisan, the artist or the craftsman." So it is in the work one knows the artist. All right. The bee was a bit hungover. All this slurping and caressing, the intoxicating pollen, had worn him out. The camellia was not in the least bit inconvenienced. It was so warm in the morning sun. She wished the moment would go on forever. Love was the best, and she let out a fragrant yawn. The bee burped. The thought of work, wrapped in her pink petals, was agony. He tickled a nearby stamen, and she giggled invitingly. An angry hornet zipped past, masticating a pulpy froth. Those guys, thought the bee, so fucking aggressive. And for what? The same old Pottery Barn existence. The other insects went about their business in their usual selfish ways, except for the ants, perfectly content with their collective drudgery. These days, he philosophized, it did seem better to derive, even imitate, than create. It was simply that kind of age. As philosophy would have it, the bee goes in between. He'd have to wait and see what the poet had in mind. It was likely the same old contented industry, the happy buzzing, festive dancing, wax making, and the scent of honey, oh so sweet honey, back at the hive. The thought of honey did get his legs moving above him in a kind of bee yoga. He could say he'd flown into a window and blanked out. It was fine. The queen never had time for him anyway. Screw her. Not worth getting into a frenzy over. She was getting to the end, old crone. The new queen was soon to emerge. The bee was a little anxious about missing the whole kill the other queen larvae thing. The mating flight was also pretty cool. He needed to ditch the camellia and buzzed his wings restlessly and winked one of his compound eyes, smugly thinking he really could see all sides of an issue. Then, in his best 17th century French accent, opined, "À l'œuvre on connaît l'artisan," and was gone.
Whoa.
The lazy bee.
Yeah.
All right, I have one last poem. It's a very short prose poem. I think it's has a little bit of tenderness in it, and a little bit of sadness, perhaps too. Togetherness. At the heart of knowledge is a broad and sunny sea of naps. Many predictions are avoided by comforting ourselves with dusk, a kind of washed ink that softens contours. There is also much to be avoided on the complacent landing, where the wood ages orange in the sliding sunlight, perfect, until we inhabit a stalled emotion. The mind isn't just a breeze in a wheat field. There's a disintegration held back, admonishing, wait. Others also grapple with ghosts pressing against each breath. These persistent habits get rooted in a mood like a closed room. What spreads from corners? What were we solving? The mobile twists above, color fades again behind a cloud, blinking. The complexity seems to shrink things. You are filled with potential agreement, that first calm which can't last. But the river is a comfort and remains possible. We deduce our own permanence. What I was saying is just a snippet without you, who makes things lively and boisterous as a Saturday. I am grateful for these distractions, to not always be assembling the past. There are more butterflies. And that's it. Thank you very much, everyone who attended. Thank
Thank
you,
you,
James.
John. Thank you very much for John. That was a beautiful reading. The last prose poem, it was like what you do to me. I go out on what looks like a straight line, but then it keeps going all over. Man, I loved it. Thank you, John. Thank you, Valerie. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. And I also want to say we're going to be taking November off. We're going to return on December 1st. We're going to do a little bit of a reading for Red Fez magazine, redfez.com. It's a magazine online. So if you've got a computer, you can see it. That's where it exists, online, redfez.com. And I'm hoping we're going to get Danny Schott. He was in there. And some of the other writers from Red Fez. Thank you, everybody. The wonderful reading. And
Lynn, thank you. Backroom, Broadsides.
thanks, guys.
It was a great evening.